Hi, Mr. Mayor, let's see, we're at 22.13, recommendation to adopt the Budget Oversight Committee's proposed funding recommendations as amended to the FY13 proposed budget. I thought I would go through the details of each and every item and then perhaps open it up for council discussion. Is that your?
Yeah, that would be fine, Mr. DeLong. I want to point out that can I have quiet, please? If we have a decision on 13, at 14, we're going to have to break for probably 20 minutes while a resolution is prepared, okay? Or after 14, excuse me.
All right.
All right, go ahead.
So the first section talks about new revenues. Number one is increase oil from $65 a barrel to $70 a barrel as proposed by the city manager last week, which generates $1.3 million. Transferring a portion of the proposed Financial Controls Bureau to Enterprise Fund releases $200,000 of general fund revenue. Eliminating the after-hours city light and power service saves $125,000 in the general fund and makes it available. Technical services, the E-rate enhancements to the libraries generated $75,000 additional general fund money. Cell tower revenue, transferring that from the water department to the city, generated $30,000. Parks, Silverado pool fees, there's two parts to this. One is we're going to propose restoring the park below at a cost of $77,000. However, when we do that, we also generate $32,000 in pool fees. And then the last item is parks increasing fees for programs, $335,000. And I want to be very clear here, the Parks is not recommending establishing any fees for any programs where there is a no cost today. This is just if there's a cost, say, of $5, it might cost $6 in fiscal year 13. And that totals $2.097 million. Next are how we propose spending those funds. First is library services. For $400,000, we can restore those community programs in each of those branches. Number two, in Parks and Rec, is restore $91,000 for adaptive recreation. Third item in Parks and Rec is to restore $16,000 for adaptive sports, including the Milliken Pool. The next item is restoring the Silverado Pool for $77,000. The next item is the Nature Center, and there's a typo here for those of you that have a copy. There's an extra zero, so it should be $155,000, not $1.55 million. And the BOC is recommending restoring 2 of those 3 FTE positions, as Parks and Rec feels that they can still provide the programs to the community in a more efficient manner. Next item from Public Works is to add $300,000 to the tree trimming budget to ensure that we can stay on a 5-year cycle and not get behind in tree trimming. And the final item is to restore $1 million in sidewalk repair funding so that the city will continue to invest $3 million in sidewalk repairs as we have for the last 14 or 15 years, and we're finally catching up. And that subtotal is $2.097 million, so we're in balance there. Then on the one-time revenues, city manager had asked for some funding to implement or hire management partners to assist with implementing some of their recommendations to make the city more cost-effective. So we allocated $200,000 in there. The next item, similar to this fiscal year, there is some city council discretionary funding for infrastructure maintenance and repair, $1 million. The fire department, $400,000 to transition to the new paramedic service model. Also in the fire department, the initial proposal was to allocate $3.6 million for construction activity to provide gender equity. In looking at the feasibility of that, it appears that would take 2 years to do all those projects. So although the city council is committed to doing 100%, since it's 2 years, we'll fund it over 2 years. So we've decreased that to $1.8 million. Next, financial management had requested $1.4 million for parking citations, billing systems, AP systems to do some system upgrades. We also felt this could be under 2 years, so we cut it in half. Next up was the financial management, new financial and HR system and other technology upgrades. There was a variety of entries there. We allocated funding for 2, which we felt would provide not only value, but could realistically be done this year, for half $500,000 for one and $800,000 for the other, for a total of $1.3 million. Next item, library services, to continue moving towards self-checkout technology to make our libraries more cost-effective as well as more efficient. So we retained the $400,000 there. One of the things that I know I heard as I attended as many community meetings as I could was that the city needs to do more in economic development. That we need to try and move beyond just cutting year after year after year. So we've allocated $225,000 for Mayor's Economic Development Fund to try and grow revenues in the city next year. Next item, as proposed by the city manager for the police department, funding for a police academy and prisoner transport vans for a total of $3.125 million. The next item, looking to restore in police overtime and or restoration of gang unit officers, allocate $1.356 million. We're also looking to restore 3 of the police department's PSSs to city manager recommended under the development services. We're looking for an equivalent skilled professional, perhaps called a public safety coordinator, at a cost of $270,000. And finally, in the police department, for a total of about $202 million, is to restore the 4-person prisoner transport unit for a cost of $374,000. One of the council members had recommended doing that as it's more cost effective to do that with a non-sworn civilian than it is taking a sworn police officer off the street at a higher price. Next, in Parks and Rec, restoring after-school and youth programs, a total of $1,291,849. And Parks and Rec, I'm going to do 2 items here. Originally, the city manager proposed $500,000 for the Los Cerritos capital improvements. Rancho Los Alamitos brought to my attention that there was a similar agreement that was made with that rancho, but part of it had never been paid, and it was continued to be pushed off for $374,334, so we added that in terms of equity. Next, in Public Works, is to allocate $2 million for the citywide street slurry seal program, which is the equivalent among the 9 districts. And the benefit here is not only to have our streets in better condition, but to save money. We've heard a lot of presentations recently at the city council how if you let your street deteriorate, it costs 10 times as much. So if we could address those streets before they get very bad, let's fix them now for a much cheaper price, and it'll save us tremendous dollars down the road. Councilmember Johnson had a council item on that recently. And then the last item was, as long as I've been here, and much longer than that, we've never appropriated general fund money for residential street repaving. We've always used different grants. So to try and to see if we can't get ahead, we've done a great job, or Public Works has, in bringing our arterial streets up to par, but we really have not made any significant progress in residential street repaving, so we look for $1.6 million there. And that's the recommendation, Mr. Mayor.
Second.
Okay, thank you, Mr. DeLong.
And if I can clarify one more thing, there was in the senior center in that restoration of $103,000. Technically, it's $124,000 in new expenses, but there's an offset in revenue of $21,000, so it's a net of $103,000.
Okay, so that would be fully restored then with that.
Yes.
Just a couple of questions. First of all, on the Rancho Los Alamitos capital improvement for $374, what is that?
That is the city had a contractual arrangement with Rancho Los Alamitos to provide $500,000 to the Los Cerritos when that foundation took over. The city only paid about a third of it.
Talk about the Los Alamitos.
Yes, Rancho Los Alamitos. So this finishes the contractual obligation.
Okay, and then I know there's a lot of comments.
Could I just break in here? I don't want it to be understood that your legal advisor necessarily agrees with that. We haven't been able to look at it, so the fact that I'm being silent doesn't mean I agree with your assessment.
I know that, and I don't know that now is the appropriate time, but certainly at some point in the evening, Mr. Mayor, if you would like the director of the rancho to come down, she can speak to it specifically.
Well, I'd like to know if we have a contractual obligation.
President Pamela Seeger, would you like her to come down and talk about what the agreement was?
Let's get it off the table.
Okay.
When we changed from, Shannon is right, when we changed from a management agreement to a lease, which happened in 1995, we did that so that we could execute capital projects on city-owned land. That had with it 3 years of tenant improvement funding at $187,871, I think, per year. The first payment was paid, and then the city came back when I was already out to bid on another project and said that they didn't have the money to pay the other 2. So that there was a 6th amendment to the lease which removed that funding. Inasmuch as we've just completed entirely at Foundation's cost of fundraising, $1.7 million worth of deferred maintenance in the Barnyard area, we were hoping to use this money to offset that.
Well, I mean,
The deferred maintenance was maybe siding, roofing, etc. That is the landlord's obligation, and we picked it up under the project.
so deferred maintenance was a landlord obligation. You
Yes,
picked
it
it up.
remains a landlord obligation.
Mr. Shannon, any comment?
Since this is the first I've heard of it, I'm not in a position to comment. If you want to put this over till next week, I'll be happy to opine on it.
Mr. DeLong, you have any clarification here?
I think we continue. I mean, let me say, maybe I don't know if there's a contractual obligation, so that's what the city needs to look at, but there definitely was a commitment on behalf of the city to provide the funding, and the city hasn't lived up to its commitment. And as I understand the commitment it's making to Rancho Los Cerritos is exactly the same commitment. So it seems appropriate to me to have parity between the two.
Okay, just want to make sure it's clear. Thanks, Ben.
Mr. Mayor?
I'm not finished yet. On this issue or? Also, Mr. DeLong, I know that there's some subject to some debate here, but by rough count, you have about $3.2 or $3.4 million in what would be one-time expenditures being applied to, I think, pretty clearly ongoing expenses, unless you make it clear. I know other council members have an issue here, too. Mr. Garcia is next, and I think he's also going to discuss this. But I mean, we have a council policy not to apply one-time revenue sources to ongoing expenses, and it's kept us out of a great deal of trouble. And as I mentioned a couple of weeks ago, none of you will ever get credit for doing the right thing, but it is the right thing. And I get this. This will, if you fund the same things next year, you will make next year's deficit larger by that amount. And that gives me a lot of heartburn. So I want to put that on the table. And secondly, the Economic Development Fund, at this point, what I would do, are you fully funding the after-school programs, Mr. DeLong?
At this point, yes.
Okay. What I would do with I would take that money. We just got a new business in town that's going to employ 70 people. We've been working with the millennials. We have a lot of economic development activity going, and I think we've been able to manage within the resources that we have. So I would take that 225 and I would apply it either to children's activities or young adult activities in the parks, or apply it to police overtime. That would be my suggestion.
Well, maybe see what the council debate is and see if that might plug the gap for where council members want to go. But if at least I can take from everything I've heard, I think the police department is probably the most likely.
Okay. I just, I think we can manage without it. And then I want to just point out that the infrastructure, the city council infrastructure and maintenance repair, that, I think if you're going to do that, and I'm not going to say it's like the funds, the kind of slush funds we used to have in the past for each council district. I realize it's more defined than that, so I don't want to call it that. But I do think you have to have pretty careful policy around that it doesn't become used for anything other than infrastructure. That has to be pretty clear. Now, I would rather see it done citywide, by citywide policies. I think Mr. Conway could use it to make sure that streets don't degrade faster. I think that's a smart thing to do. I'd rather have it in the hands of citywide activities rather than focused on council districts. I'm just going to put that on the table. So those are my comments. Obviously, and I'll finally point out that while it is a judgment call moving oil from 65 to 70, I'm going to again tell everyone this is a very volatile commodity, and we have diminished supplies of that commodity. So you have two things going on: a volatile price and a diminished amount of free oil every year that we have. And you can move it to $70, but you're taking a chance. And I'd like to see, if not some reserve around that. I know the city manager suggested this. It's not something I would have done. And you could be at a mid-year problem if oil drops, as it has done before, into the 40s, 30s, 40s, or 50s, and you'd have a mad scramble. I don't think that is a prudent thing to do. It is judgmental. I'll admit that. and it may not cause any problem, but it is increasing the risk that the city faces. Mr. Garcia.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I did have a clarification question. I don't know if it's for the city attorney or for the city manager. I know that we put over passing the budget for the harbor for next week. That's correct. And so is it possible to even pass the budget tonight if the council is in that direction, or how would that work by not including the harbor?
You can pass the budget tonight, say the harbor, and pass it to next week, or you can pass the entire budget next week.
Okay, so it could be done separately.
Yeah, but next Tuesday is effectively the last day that you can pass the budget.
Correct. Thank you. Well, first, I do want to start just by thanking not just Councilman DeLong, but just the whole Budget Oversight Committee in general. I know that you guys have done a lot of work. Councilman DeLong, you personally, I know, have done a lot of work and reached out to each individual member. I appreciate the phone calls and the discussion. So it has been something I know that you put a lot of effort into, and so I quite frankly, a lot of this proposal I think is really going in the right direction. I think that the restorations are a lot of these are the appropriate restorations. I do have a couple questions and things that I'd like to see done, maybe moved a little bit differently, but I think overall you put together a good proposal, or the committee has. So a couple questions and maybe thoughts, and then we'll kind of see where everybody else is at. My first question is, I heard in the Budget Oversight Committee a discussion, and I didn't hear all of it, about the PD PSS program, and maybe we can get a clarification on this, that some of those positions would be moved out of the police department to development services. Maybe I did not hear this correctly. Can we get a little bit of information on what that means?
That's correct. That was a proposal from the city manager a week or so ago. If we restored them, we'd restore them under development services. I talked to Chief McDonald last week and asked him his opinion on that.